Welcome back to Legal Candy. I am your host, attorney Candice Colucci from the Colucci Law Group, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Miss MK. How are you?
I'm fine. Hello, Candice. Good to
Hello.
be here.
Good to have you. And our content producer. So she has gotten together some goodies because today we are going to talk again about Laci Peterson and Scott Peterson. But we're going to focus on some of those facts that take place in the trial that lead to Scott Peterson being found guilty of 2 counts of murder of his beautiful pregnant wife, Laci Peterson, and their unborn child. She was 8 months pregnant at the time, and he was found guilty in 2000, and I think 3 was at the time that he was actually found guilty, 2004 maybe. So we are now reopening this case as it is back in the news because there are some new developments in his actual investigation, and the question is being asked, could Scott Peterson, who was one of America's most hated men, be innocent? Dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. So our job is to really unravel it legally. And so we have really went back to like the facts of the case that took place during that trial. And it has been interesting looking back at it. So when we last left off, it was the unfortunate place that we were at is we were talking about at the point in time when they actually find the bodies of Laci Peterson and Connor. So just a little recap is that in 2002, on Christmas Eve, Laci Peterson goes missing around between 9:30 and 10 a.m. What they do figure out is that at around 10:18 a.m., the dog that she was allegedly walking, Mackenzie, the golden retriever, they do find, a neighbor finds this dog on a leash, just kind of roaming around a little while in the area. And they, as a courtesy, she takes the dog, she puts him back into the Peterson home. And that's kind of the time mark that they get. They think that she was, that it potentially between Scott Peterson leaving his house at 9:30 a.m., allegedly to go fishing. They do have tracked his location. They know he takes the boat up an hour and a half out and puts it in the water. And then we do know that at potentially some point in time by 10:18, there's at least we know Laci Peterson is not in the house. She's missing because the dog is roaming free, that she was supposed to be taking a walk. And at 9:30, Scott Peterson says he leaves his wife at home with the dog, with her saying the intention is to take this dog on a walk. So it's a very small frame there between 9:30, 10-ish. No one's really got 100 exact point, no one's 100% on that timeline. So really between up until 10:18 a.m. is that's really the timeline of which we know something potentially takes place there. And I mean, arguably, could it have happened earlier in the morning? I guess it could have, but we just know that he leaves at 9:30 a.m., says that his wife's there, and then she goes missing. He doesn't return till 4:30 from fishing during the day, and that's when the entire investigation starts looking for this beautiful pregnant woman. This story goes viral. Even though there wasn't social media back there, the media was all over. It was on every single news kind of broadcasting all over the country at the time because it was just striking, kind of just
Christmas
shocking.
Eve.
Yeah, Christmas Eve. Who goes missing then?
Perfect family.
Yep. And so then we find out through this whole investigation, after you're watching Scott, he just lacks emotion. I guess that's who he is as a person. It seems to be very indicative. Everyone believes that he's potentially, guilty of murdering or his missing wife, who they have not found at the point in time. But then he comes forward that he has a mistress, which is the just ultimate dagger for him, to where the public definitely turns against him. And so based on all of that, they are able, at that point in time, they couldn't get an arrest warrant before when there was no bodies. Now the bodies have washed up. It is so tragic how the bodies are found. And they're found in a very just morbid way, is that the Laci Peterson's torso is found. She is missing the head, arms, most of the legs, and it's severely decomposed. At this point in time, it would have been in the water for about 4 months, if all those pieces are the same. Also, that she had cracked ribs, her uterus and cervix were intact, but her internal organs were missing. And then they find her body, and on April 14th, 2003, April 13th, 2003, they do find the unfortunate body of the fetus, which was Connor, the little baby, and that his umbilical cord was still attached. What some experts who do come forward during this investigation and during the trial, they state that it wouldn't have been uncommon. The fact is, if she had been in the water submerged for that long, at some point in time, you've got animals in the water that would have potentially harmed her. And then at some point in time, the baby would have come out of her decomposing body. It just, oh my gosh.
He was found in utero.
Yeah. It is just
horrific.
It's so horrific, of those pieces. But what they're not able to determine is the cause of death. So they've got no definite cause of death. They do obviously are able to do DNA, and they link the DNA back to Laci Peterson and Connor, which is devastating for the family. And that is what the missing piece was for the detectives in order to get the arrest warrant of Scott. So they do arrest Scott on April 18th, 2003. And he is going to the golf course. So here's these pieces again and it's like, can I judge it and tell you that I think that this man's behaving, and now he's on his way to a golf game when his children, when his wife and child are still missing? I don't get it. But from what I know about people who golf, a lot, they would probably tell you that didn't sound as crazy as it seemed. That they've probably golfed at really, really kind of untimely points in their life.
Yeah.
That there's probably some wives out there who are like, let me tell you when my husband went golfing. But I do know it's a way of stress relieving. It's a way of antidepressants. I mean, it's got all kinds of pieces for it. So
look at Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, look at how he uses golf.
Yeah, well, I think it's every president. I think I remember it was like, I think when 9/11 had come down, I was reading a book, but somebody else was, I mean, I think there's always,
they're on the golf course.
Yeah, it's a golf course thing. But they do find him with his hair dyed. He had dyed it to where he looked like a Backstreet Boy or an NSYNC member is what he looked like when he finally gets arrested. He's got like blonde tips. And the car that he is driving in has $10,000 cash in it, 12 Viagra, which is probably the most questioning thing that I see in this list of things. Survival gear, camping equipment. He's got change of clothes, 4 cell phones, 2 driver's license, his and his brother, which I guess he resembles his brother a little bit. And the storyline is that when they arrest him, although they have been following him, they have him tracked, they've got a helicopter on him, all of those kind of things, that the headline when they arrest him is that he planned to flee to Mexico because they arrest him in San Diego, which is not far from Mexico. But I think this is a good example of us saying that there are times when the headline is created in a way that doesn't necessarily always lead to the supporting kind of conclusion that all those facts really give them. So in situations like this, there was explanations for that. Is that his $10,000, eventually I think his brother and sister come forward and they say that they had just purchased his truck from him. And so they had given him $10,000 cash. That's how he had that. And then he had been traveling all over. So he's got clothes in his car, but the 4 cell phones is because I think he was under the impression he was potentially being tracked or are recorded or mediums. Everybody's all over him. He's being threatened. He says in public places, and he explains that these are part of the fact is that as of now, it took him 20 years to come forward, and Scott Peterson now has done some more interviews since he's been found guilty, and so those are some of the things that we took into account. And talking about the interview that he did, it was once again, it was so interesting to see him. So before he was more fuller, now he looks like he would be the dad of Scott Peterson.
Yeah.
He's much thinner. His face is sunken in. But he didn't come across with any real new information. Like, was very much still of the, and that's what leads me to believe that whether I believe he's innocent or guilty, I do see the personality trait of potentially someone who is not an emotional person,
Very
because he's doing an
yeah.
interview and you're sitting in jail. I feel like at this point in time, whether you're innocent or guilty, you're sitting in jail for 20 something years, professing that you're innocent. And he literally looked like someone who was a candidate for presidency, asking questions.
Yeah.
He was just like, oh, like they were like, can you scoot over? He's like, oh yeah, I can. I'm like, it was just very respectful. Even when he was he had a hearing recently, and even the hearing, he's talking to the judge very respectfully. And, but it didn't seem, again, like if we wanted that emotionality out of him, there was still no emotions out of him. I think that some of the new information that we've gathered over time is some of the holes in the investigation that took place, some of the people who were not interviewed. But more than anything, as we're going to talk right now, is what took place during the trial. That, in my opinion, and based on some of the juries that were interviewed afterwards, could have changed the outcome of this trial. So let's get into what is the evidence. Everybody wants to know, what's the evidence? So he gets charged with 2 charges. First-degree murder of Laci Peterson, so this was his wife, and then second-degree murder of their unborn son, who was 8 months in, she was 8 months pregnant with him, of Connor Peterson. So those are the 2 charges. For first-degree murder in California at this time, you've got to prove that there is, this is what makes this big difference between the first degree and second degree, is first degree is going to require that premeditation. So you got to show that there is this premeditation, there is a plan in place, or at least a forethought. There's at least a thought that takes place for at least some sort of time, never really clear, but at least some sort of time where you had the moment to think about it, potentially reflect on it, and you still go forward. That's what premeditation is. And sometimes it can be seconds that they determine is enough to show that you thought about it before and that you killed them. Second degree murder, usually in this case, is not going to have that premeditation. So you don't have to premeditate it. You just have to do some actions that lead to the death of somebody. Now,
but if it was him, wouldn't he know, that
absolutely.
If he killed Laci, that Connor would die?
Yes.
So
yes.
How is that not premeditation?
Because the decision of who decides what these charges are is, in this instance, comes down to the prosecutor. So the prosecutor has to determine first degree and second degree. Could both of those murders have been under first degree murder? Absolutely. Just like you're saying, is that it absolutely could be. You've premeditated this, because there's a baby there. But sometimes, to make it easier for a jury, because it's a really high standard for first degree, right? There's a lot more elements that have to be charged, and that premeditation has to be so clear. So if the first degree is getting you what you want, which would have been either the death penalty or life in jail, the reason why they usually will do like second degree murder on like the baby in this instance is because they potentially don't want to make it any harder for a jury. And they know that if they find first degree murder for the mother, they're obviously going to do second degree murder or any other murder at that point in time for the child. So it's really just a stylistic approach, because he absolutely could have been guilty for both of those. With the way the jury saw it, they believe that he intentionally had his actions were intentional, premeditated in a way to produce the death of both of them. So that's really, it's a stylistic thing. So he gets charged with both of those murders. And so you've got the trial that takes off. The trial of that time period. There are so many people outside the courtroom. There's so many people outside the jail when he gets arrested that he says now in an interview that he like couldn't sleep at night. He says that they were there all night yelling, screaming his name. Like there were children there, which I thought was interesting for him to say, is like even people brought their children out and it was late at night. And he just, and the entire time in his head, the way that he really portrays it is he feels like in his position to this day is that I'm innocent, and that because the focus was on me the entire time, the police department never actually looked for the real murderers, and they got away, and I've got to do something about it, and we've all got to do something about it. But let's get into the actual evidence, because when we were first talking about doing this story, I'm like, I could tell you that I used to always look back and think, oh yeah, absolutely. Like he absolutely on my list of like, he definitely did it. And then when we go back through the evidence, I'm like, whoa. Like, what happened here? I'm just like, okay. And I had to question. I'm like, did I do the same thing? Like, I really think I try to be above. I try to be above, and I try to always go, listen, I looked at the fact, I looked at this case. Even when I was younger, I was like, I tried to always be like devil's advocate and look at it kind of from both sides. And I realized that also his demeanor made him so unlikable to people. And so instantly, and then with the way the media portrayed him, he was guilty to the world. There was nobody on his side, literally, except his mother. His biggest defendant is a sister-in-law who I'm like, Scott's brother married this woman, and she is a sister-in-law. She becomes his biggest advocate. She is fighting until this day. She's involved with everything. It's not even his actual sister, his sister-in-law. So his sister's involved. And so that's really the only team that believes this man against everyone. I don't think you would bump into somebody until now, maybe, with seeing the case be reopened now, where they would have questioned. Like Scott wasn't, there was no polarization, I think, to Scott. I don't think people, I mean, polarization on one side. I don't think it was like on both sides. I don't think people were like, listen, there's no way that man did it. No way that man did it.
There's nothing.
But it's also because of the evidence that the media disseminated. And we find out that there is sometimes a connection between everybody working together. You have the police department who works with the state attorney very closely. They work together. And then you have the media who also works with those parties. So you've got everyone working together, and then you still have a trial where the jury is going to get picked from that county. So it's like there is pieces. So when people talk about this is a conspiracy theory, this is all that stuff, and you think, oh, you're crazy, man. But there is something to be said a lot of times about the power of the media and the power of the police department to shade things in a light that really can be indicative of what ends up happening in the outcome. And sitting here today, I would not sit here and go, Scott Peterson is innocent. But sitting here today, I can tell you I have a lot of questions, which I saw another interviewer said the same thing. I have a lot of questions for me as an attorney that don't sit well with the high level of evidence that is usually needed and that we should require to find somebody guilty beyond all reasonable doubt of first-degree murder that has a penalty of the death penalty.
And how could that jury be unbiased?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. So it's just...
Is it even possible?
It's really, really, like, when I looked at it, because what we do know now is that there is no direct evidence, unfortunately, directly, that links Scott Peterson to the murder of Laci Peterson. That's unfortunate. There isn't any direct evidence. It is circumstantial, unfortunately, at best. There are some pieces that are very circumstantial, but it's really also, there's a jump that has to be made. And there are no eyewitnesses to the crime. And we don't know when she was killed. And we don't know how she or him was killed. I mean, those are huge questions, which is why when the
Or even
defense,
where.
yeah, or where,
I mean,
which is, you know, where a body was found, we don't know where, which
Mhm.
is why the defense team that got together, he got a celebrity attorney, and this celebrity attorney came on, and really one of the things is that it was Mark Garagos.
Yeah.
Yep, Mark Garagos, who it was a fantastic attorney, one of the best cross-examiners that are out there. He's great at that. And there's a couple of other attorneys that were all part of this team that were just great attorneys. And from a defense attorney's perspective, I can understand why they would look at this and go, "Oh, you should be not guilty." Like that, like they could feel confident to some
Mhm.
degree. What I can tell you as a trial attorney is that, and it's a great time that people always, I mean, I hear it sometimes and judges like to say it, but it's true that there are cases that are won that should have never been won, and there are cases that are lost that should have been won. Like, and those are just what the facts are. So no matter how good you think your case is, there's still a likelihood that it all can go wrong during a trial where a jury goes, listen, we didn't like this, we didn't like that, and we're not fighting for them. So that being said, it's always a risk, but they didn't have any choice. At that point in time, it was either he's got to go to trial, or he takes, I don't even remember if there was even a plea deal in this case, but but that's why they felt confident, because of the fact that there was a lack of actual direct evidence. And that's what people are questioning. They're going, what do you mean there's a lack of evidence? Because everyone's going in their head, they're going, well, I remember. What do you remember? What do you actually remember about Scott Peterson and Laci Peterson? What I remember is he lied.
That's it.
And he had an affair.
Right.
And he was, and then he was talking to this girl during the time he was supposed to be looking for his wife. So all those pieces together were what people are going, yeah. And then for me, when I first started looking back at it, is let's talk about some of the actual evidence. Let's talk about what came out during trial. For the prosecution's case, state attorney's case, these were the evident pieces that were huge for them. The affair with Amber. Keep on telling it.
I know.
These are the evidence. Sorry, Amanda. These are the pieces of evidence that were very pivotal for the prosecution. The affair with Amber Fry.
But that's not even necessarily evidence, though. It's just,
let me tell you what it is. It's motive. So that is what they get to use it for. Now, remember we talked about the rules of evidence. Not everything can come in. And in my opinion, a lot of times it always comes down to how well the attorneys argue the evidence, what can come in and come out, the knowledge of the judge, how well they follow the rules, or how well they know the rules of evidence, because don't make any assumptions. Everyone knows what they're doing in the room. Because there are times that it can be easily argued that an affair like this was not relevant, that there's no relevance to the fact that he was having an affair. Unfortunately, the way that the prosecution can argue, because I as a defense attorney would say, I would have argued, no, it can't come in. This affair with Amber Fry can't come in. It's not relevant to if Scott Peterson murdered Laci Peterson on that day or time. It doesn't make any one of the elements more or less likely to prove.
So how did it come in then?
Because the other side would have argued that this would go to motive. So motive is one of those little teeny areas that, as much as we talk about how big motive is, you need it. It is one of the nice little caveats in the law that a prosecution gets to use sometimes, that if they can show that it's a strong piece of evidence, that it would strongly be related and would be highly relevant to something like motive, you got to have a lot of supporting evidence of it, then you can overcome the burden of the fact that it may not be relevant, but it may not be relevant to what you think as would be the reason why somebody would murder somebody or not, but it can be easily argued to a judge that says, listen, yes, although this is going to be prejudicial and hurtful, it is very relevant to the motive. It's very clear that this would be a reason why somebody would murder somebody else. So let's say we're talking about before, as I was saying, let's say the facts of the murder were, of the affair were different. Like, let's just say that the affair had been going on for years, and that the text messages or his phone calls with her they said things like, listen, I love my wife and kids. I'm never leaving you for them.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry you're upset about it. Like, but that's just the truth of it. Like, if that's what he'd been saying this whole entire time, that would have been harder for the state to have argued to the judge, hey, this is the motive. Because the other side would go, no, there's no motive. Here's what he's clearly saying. He told her he was never going to leave her. What's the motive he has now to leave her when he's already told his mistress he's not going to leave her? So those are the kind of background arguments that we talk about that happen between attorneys. Why it's so imperative you have trial attorneys understand this stuff is that because something as important as that affair, if the facts were different and it had been ruled that affair couldn't come in, this case would have been imperatively different. It would have been huge, because that is, anybody who's watching the trial will tell you that the defense was doing a really good job. Like, they had debunked a lot of the detectives' work. They had called into question the detectives they had changed their reports. They had purposely kept people out of their report. They had purposely not interviewed a bunch of people. They were very biased about their investigation against Scott. And the attorneys were doing a great job. And then it is when Amber took that stand that it all came crashing down, because, like I could say,
witness,
the level of lying that it was hard for any jury to look and go, does that look like a man who is sad, remorseful? Is he any emotion at all, except for the fact that he's concerned about carrying on this affair with this mistress, while his daughter, his wife and his child are missing. And so those things are just, it's hard to kind of explain that, of how much that gets in a jury's head that goes, no, this guy can't be trusted. We don't believe anything that he's potentially trying to say in these interviews. So the affair comes in under the rules of evidence. The other issues is that when it comes to actual kind of evidence and those pieces together, is that we've got the
hair.
The hair.
A
so
single strand of hair.
The DNA we have is hair, and then we have another evidence of the concrete. So between hair, concrete, affair, and the location of the body, that becomes their best witness. All of them. That's really it. That's what they have. Let's talk about the hair.
Yeah.
They find a single strand of hair matching Laci, and it's found on a pair of pliers on Scott Peterson's boat. That's what they've got. And I'm just like, listen,
that's it.
Listen, let me know. Because my husband is going to have a lot of explaining to do, because my hair is everywhere. You see my hair, it just comes out. My husband's always like, why is your hair on my shoulder? Like, why is it on my face? And so,
how did it get
wrong? It's like, what? So listen, you're asking the wrong person if I think that that's suspect or not. That's the least thing I'm concerned about. I'm like, I'm concerned you didn't find more pieces of hair at this point in time. She does have short hair.
One strand of hair.
But yeah. My hair is everywhere. My hair's in my husband's toothbrush sometimes. He's like, I don't understand how this happens. I was like, it just flies in the air.
You couldn't even see the pliers.
Yeah, it's like, it just flies in the air. So you've got the hair and the set of pliers. And here was a good piece of information, and the reason why they used it is because there was this testimony, and there's so many assumptions that happen during a murder investigation, but definitely in a murder investigation where connections are made that maybe shouldn't be made. And one of them was like, there was this narrative that that Laci had never been on the boat or never seen the boat. And this comes from her talking to her friends and her mom, who she never said anything about this new boat that happened. So it's just assuming that she tells them every single thing. But what we do find out, one of the pieces of evidence that one of the detectives had erased from his report in one of the edits of his reports, was that when they went to go interview the people at the storage units, like who had similar units, they had found out on the 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve, that Laci Peterson had been there and she had used the restroom in the storage unit next door. That's because there's no restroom, I guess, in his or whatever. So that she had used the restroom. So that means she was there, which means she did know that there was a boat. But those are things that we kind of find out later on. Because the position and the way that they had presented this during trial was that she didn't know about this boat, that by all accounts, she'd never been on this boat. So why is there one single strand of hair in these pliers? The defense says these pliers were old, that they didn't look like they had been used recently. But that was like what they kind of held on to. But what didn't come into trial is those other pieces of information, like the fact that that somebody else said that she had been at the actual storage unit the day before. So we've got the next evidence that the state used is there is concrete anchors. So these are man-made concrete anchors. And so guys, well, listen, I am not going to even pretend to be like a really great fisherman. Like, I'm not even going to like start to try to understand.
Oh, good.
Not my thing at all. I do like boats, but you know, not fishing is, I don't have my patience. No, it's not there.
And
it's not for hunting. Yeah. So finding out that you can make your own anchors.
Yeah.
You can put them in like a big coffee can. You just mix up the cement and then put the cement inside a coffee can, and then I'm sure you have like, you know, I'm sure you've got a chain that you put down, you know, while it's drying, before it dries, and then literally you got yourself an anchor. So allegedly he had actually made an anchor before he went out fishing, and there was disagreement about the fact that the state's argument was that it looked like he made more than one, yet they only find one when the boat is found. Yeah, they seem to think that there were 6 anchors made. Yeah, and that what he would have used it for would have been to tie her body down. And then the location of the body. So what we know is that he drives an hour and a half, which people think that that's way too far for him to go test this boat out, that there's a bunch of other places he could have gone to test his boat out. So I'm not saying I'm an expert with fishermen, but here's what I do know about the fishermen that I have known over my life is they're very specific about where they fish. That they're not just like dropping their boat. Like you would think like, hey, there's some water, we should just go. Yeah. They're not doing that. Like they have researched, or they know where is the places where they've got the good, you know, fish that they're looking for, or whatever it is, or they know where there's not going to be anywhere else. So there is a rhyme, you know, and reason to where they actually like, you know, take the boat out and all those other stuff. So, but that was a huge question, and a huge kind of, and I would say one of the flashlights that really became very big for the detectives and became big for the state during this trial was that the hour and a half away that Scott goes and takes this boat out that they believe is too far and he shouldn't have gone that far, is they end up finding Laci Peterson's body and Connor Peterson's body. Literally, I think it was just 2 miles from this area that he says that he was fishing. They have no reason to disagree that Scott left the house and did go and actually drop his boat in the water up about an hour and a half up in California by the bay, because of his phone pinging on the tower. So they knew that part. So there's your evidence. Okay. That coupled with the fact that he lacked emotion, so it's the lacking of emotion. And when I say the affair, I'd say lies. That was it, members of the jury. Those were the pieces. So it's in this. These are the pieces that get me. So the defense's position. Now remember, as an attorney, we have to make decisions on what we're going to fight to come into trial, but also we have to make a decision based on what is our theory of the case. What do we believe happened? And then there are things we don't bring into trial. We make the decision, just like the state attorneys and prosecution makes the decision of what they're bringing in. We also, as the defense attorneys, we also do that too, is we decide what evidence comes in. And I think that is one of the biggest issues, was there was a deliberate kind of theory that took place of what they believed actually had happened, that didn't really become clear. It didn't really become clear. So the trial starts out, and this is an interesting kind of observation, is that we talked about in a trial is that the only person who has a burden in a case like this, burden, which means a responsibility to prove to the jury, is going to be the prosecution. They have to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that he had committed this crime of the way that it was charged. The defense doesn't have a burden. We don't have to prove anything at all. But during the opening statement, the attorney for Scott makes what we would say an overpromise. An overpromise and goes, listen, I'm going to meet that burden, but I'm also going to prove to you that somebody else did this crime. But it didn't really develop very clearly during that. And the problem with that is that not only can witnesses never lie to a jury, but an attorney cannot lie to a jury either. No. It's the same thing. If they think you lie or overpromise, that's a huge thing. So when I was trying cases and was learning from like the best in the world at Stetson, that was one of the like just it was so kind of ingrained in my brain over and over again about how important it is that whatever it is that you're promising this jury during opening statement, you better deliver on. Right. Because if you don't, then now they don't trust you at the end. And the reason why that's important in a case like this is because when the jury starts their case, the jury's going, what's my responsibility? That's what they're going. Tell me what my responsibility is. So as an attorney, our job is to start by going, hello, members of the jury. Your responsibility here today is X. Like the judge is going to explain it. Sometimes we, during opening statement as attorneys, will kind of remind them that here is your obligation. Yeah, this is your rules. This is what you have to do. So the jury sitting there at the beginning of this case would have believed their job was to look at all the facts and that they had to make sure that the state attorney, that the prosecution, proved beyond all reasonable doubt that Scott Peterson committed this crime. And that should have been it, is that they had to prove that, and then it should have been made clear by the defense, we don't have to prove anything. We don't have to tell you who actually killed her. I have no responsibility to know that, or to tell it to you, or to prove it to you. They have to prove that the person who did this murder was Scott. So
did they prove it? I mean, he was found guilty of murder.
Yeah. So they did. They do prove it. But the problem is that then when the defense goes up during the opening and the defense goes, well, I'm also going to go above and beyond that. I'm going to tell you who does this crime. Then that means now the jury's sitting back going, okay, tell me who did it. Because this is the question in their head. Then their head goes like this. Well, if Scott didn't do it, then who did? Then who did? And now normally in a regular murder trial, I as a defense attorney would come up like in a closing argument, or a defense attorney would say like, hey, just a reminder, we don't have to prove who did it. Our job is to show you that they didn't meet their burden. That those people over there, the state attorney, that they had to show you that he did it and that they didn't show you that. Yeah. And so sometimes what we will do is we will start putting up other theories that it was this person or this person or this person if we have enough evidence. And the thing is that I don't know what took place, but his attorneys promised that they were going to tell you who really did this in a way, and then don't during the trial. So they leave this door open for a couple of different reasons that I think that become very, very pivotal. So
did the defense Did the defense produce an alternate theory?
No.
They didn't. So the burglary and all that didn't come in.
So here's what never came in, which is interesting, is that the defense starts by saying, listen, this is all the police. They were biased from the beginning. They didn't look at anybody else. They weren't investigating things. And here's the reasoning for pretty much everything. And they'll say that there's no physical evidence here. There's no witnesses that saw this murder take place or any of those kind of things. And then this is where the case becomes an issue. And in my opinion, where my questions come in, now we've looked at it before, is here are the pieces of evidence that do not come into this trial, which are very important. Is that, one, there was a burglary that took place across the street of the Peterson's home. Now, here's where the interesting part comes into play. Those neighbors were out of town during the holidays. So there was this question as to what actual day did this robbery take place. So the neighbors come home days after Laci's missing, and they realize that their home's been burglarized. So what we do know now, because we've now seen interviews with the private investigators. So the Scott Peterson's family hires a private investigator, which in my opinion is a very important fact. It's not very common for someone who's guilty to hire a private investigator, but I would imagine if he's holding onto the story, his family would have been, all for it. And this private investigator's information that he brings forward now are very disappointing that they weren't able to come into trial, because this really could have been important in the trial. Is that this burglary that takes place, the reason why it's so important is that the information that they originally find out is that they think that the burglary takes place on the same day that Laci Peterson goes missing. And the allegations are that it was potentially a van, several males that had dark skin but were not African American, and that they gave this lady who was driving by kind of a weird look when she saw them, and but then she thought, well, it's not my business, I'm not going to get involved, and so that was the original date they thought that this burglary took place. So there was some initial investigation with the police department that maybe that there was some type of connection, that maybe the burglary happens and a pregnant 8-month pregnant woman goes, is there a burglary over there? Let me just go investigate. I doubt that's what happened, but who knows? She's walking, so who knows? And that they originally think there is some connection to the two. So they start really putting out the feelers, and they put like a reward for, even though it's a burglary they wouldn't have ran in the national news. They start running this story. They get the news, start running the story. Like, we need to know who's involved with this burglary ASAP. They put a reward out there, and they started getting a bunch of tips on the burglary. And this is what's interesting about this burglary, is that during the investigation, which I think is suspect, is that there was a back and forth that now the allegations are that the date that they did the burglary was on the 26th, which would have been when there is tons of police media all outside their house. So you're saying that they go and do a burglary and all this media is outside. But why this became suspect to me was that when I was looking into some of the other evidence and information and some of the interviews that took place, the reason why these guys came forward and they were so willing to cooperate with the police, the people who did this burglary, these two older white men, they said that the pressure was put on them, that were like, you were obviously there the same day that she goes missing. You're probably connected to the disappearance and murder. And so we don't know what are all the interview tapes or all the interviews that took place with these burglary suspects. But something weird happens, is that the police department does say that they were very, very talkative, like, oh, no, we'll tell you, we absolutely did do this. We did this crime, but we definitely didn't do that crime. They did not want to be connected, obviously, to this missing girl. And I can only imagine what the police would have said to them, like, said, listen, so I find it very coincidental that the date changes from the 24th to the 26th. Because after they changed their days, and now say they think that they're willing to admit that it was on the 26th, which would have been when there was tons of media circus, it also rules them out as a suspect in this murder. And that's what happens sometimes, is a police department is supposed to stay unbiased and to take in all of the information. Same with the state attorneys, prosecutors. They're supposed to take in all of the information as if they're the seeker of truth. They're not supposed to, this is a misconception people think, they're not supposed to only be getting justice for those victims.
Pick and choose.
Yeah, that's not who they represent. The state attorney doesn't actually, if you guys ever notice, they don't represent the victim. They represent the state because they're looking, they're trying to make sure people are held accountable for their actions. But they represent the state, which means they're supposed to equally be as defensive, that if they find evidence that points to the innocence of the defendant, they should be just as, they should be just as the same advocate. They should be just as, enraged by the information or excited about the information as they're getting it. But that's not what happens. That's not what usually happens, unfortunately, which is why there's a lot of times a discord between both sides of the attorneys, because there are times when I find myself having to remind a state attorney at times and going, hey, don't forget, like, I understand that there's a victim here, but your job is to make sure he gets a fair trial also. Like, that's part of your job, is to make sure if you want to do justice to the state or the government, you're making sure people are being treated fair. So with the police department is that this allowed them to rule out the burglary. But this always seemed very, now that I've gone back through this case before again, it seemed very convenient, because here's how, not saying this is what happened, but let me explain to you what a police department can do. Because this is how the questioning would look. When they're sitting them down and the detectives want to get rid of every other plausible motive, because they have a win mentality. Win, win, win. It's what happens with a lot of detectives. It's because they want to know that they can give an answer to this family that goes, this person was responsible, this person has been found guilty. Like the same thing with the prosecution. There is a win mentality. Just like as a defense attorney, there's a win mentality. But in this instance, it is imperative that the detectives and the state attorney rule out this burglary, because that will be an alternative potential theory that could be very, very relevant. And so what can happen, which I've seen done before in an interview with a detective, is this is what it would sound like. The officer would be like, all right, so let me explain to you what we know. We've got a missing pregnant woman and her unborn child are missing on the 24th. And that's why we've been looking at you, Heavenlies, because if you committed this burglary on the 24th, if you did it on the 24th, then we may potentially have to arrest you for the murder or disappearance or kidnapping of the woman next door who's now missing, because now we can put you at the same place and time. But we really don't have a lot of evidence. We don't have Ring cameras yet. we don't have cell phones that have videos yet. So unfortunately, we don't have any other evidence that tells us what day you were there. You could have been there the 24th, you could have been there the 25th, you could have been there the 26th. If you were there any other day after the 24th, then you wouldn't be under investigation for the murder or disappearance of Laci Peterson. And that's all they have to say. To then now, guess what their story is? It was the 26th.
Yeah.
That's when we were there.
Willing
it was the 26th.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm not saying that's what happened, but I want everybody to understand, instead of seeing things in one perspective, instead of you seeing a piece of evidence and going, absolutely what it is, question everything every single thing that we know, there's another side to it. So you really have to look at it as objectively as you can to really look at the evidence and go, okay, I want to hear both sides so then I can see all of the evidence and kind of put it all together and look at the totality of those circumstances. Because that being said, is that was huge for me. So guess what happens with the evidence rules? This burglary that now the guys admit that, no, it wasn't the 24th, it was the 26th. We were there way after this. We were there after she goes missing. That means that now the judge actually rules this burglary and any of the information cannot come into trial.
Wow.
So this never comes into trial. What else is the best kind of evidence for the defense is that the private investigator finds and does a lot of research and realizes he finds like 5 different people who live in the neighborhood who all testify to seeing Laci Peterson walking. They don't know her by her name, but they all say a very heavily pregnant woman, beautiful, and walking a gold retriever. And although me as an attorney, I would have wanted a census of the entire area, how many people who are in the area were pregnant, how many people had dogs, and then narrowed it down to where I'd be telling a jury, listen, there isn't a single woman within a 20-mile radius that's pregnant and has short hair and has a golden retriever. Therefore, we have these 3, 4, 5 people who've come forward on different streets, mind you, that create this path going to this park that she allegedly walks to, that all testify to seeing her at different times, like later at 9 and then at 10, like seeing her along this route. That never comes into trial. And why? Is because the defense never brings it into trial. Of course, the prosecution isn't going to bring it into trial. They never even go, they got tip calls and these calls and never considered it. They don't have it part of their investigation as far as the information that they give to the state attorney that the state attorney uses as it being an issue. They don't make that clear. The state attorney doesn't bring it up during their case, and the defense decides not to bring it up.
Why?
It's the only thing that I could think of was like, and what Scott says, and Scott kind of says that, one is he regrets not testifying, which as an attorney in this case, he is a perfect example. As I tell you, you would never want him to testify.
I know.
He couldn't. You could I honestly believe that you could tell that man right then that his mother had just been murdered, and he wouldn't have. I don't whether he was connected to it or not. I don't know how much emotion you would have got out of that man. I don't think he's an emotional person, from the looks of things. So you would never want to put him on the stand. Like it's your worst nightmare. Someone like that. It doesn't mean that they're guilty. It just means we are good at trial litigation and we understand how a jury perceives things, and it is not a good case for you to take the stand on. So, but I really truly don't know. I think Scott kind of tried to make excuses and kind of tried to say, well, we were moving really fast in the trial. I think he ended up not waiving his right to a speedy trial, which means they were moving a lot quicker because he said he thought he was going to be going home. So it just, unfortunately, there are a lot of things that happens that attorneys decide. I'd like to know why, but to me, that testimony was huge, because if anyone saw Laci walking past 9:30 or a little bit later, which there are people who testified to seeing her walk, that would mean that he was already out of the area and she's walking.
And she was alive.
Nobody really unraveled those. And that to me is the biggest question. If I had known how many people in the area were pregnant with a gold retriever, and I had known that there's no other options and it had to have been her, that would have been enough for me to have questioned. Yeah. And the jury does say, the jury comes back with the information that they're given. Okay. The other theories don't come in. The burglary doesn't come in, and nobody testifying to the fact that they saw her walking comes in. They said, had they known that people had seen her walking, that would have been, they have said that would have been pivotal for them to have known, which is really upsetting, which is super upsetting to know. But I would defer to the attorney who's on this case and say, I bet you he has an amazing, the team did fantastic, although they ended up obviously losing the case, they did a fantastic job calling into question some of the theories in the way that they were questioning them. Before the trial started, this was another interesting fact, is they did a test cross-examination on Scott Peterson while he was in custody. They brought in an expert attorney who does cross-examination in order to see what it would look like if he took the stand, and they determined that was no bueno. No good. No good. It can't. And it opens the door for everything. And once he takes the stand, his credibility becomes a question. Before he takes the stand, they can't just get in every time he's ever lied or anything he ever did. But once you take the stand, you open the door to all kinds of different rules.
Who knows what lies
that now all kinds of different stuff get to come up. So that's really what happens. So those are really the questions. I think a detective in this case said that in a murder investigation, there are no coincidences. That's what he said. And I don't know if there's any other statement that I have more of I'm very passionate about the fact that I do not believe that. In a murder investigation, there are absolutely coincidences. There are coincidences sometimes that back in the day used to tell my clients, I believe you're innocent, but I'll tell you what, karma, cosmic energy, like coincidental, whatever word you want to call it, those pieces came together on that day in time for you to where it looks so bad on paper that this is not a case that we'd want to take to trial, because coincidentally, you look really, really guilty. Although I'm telling you, I've seen it before where we end up finding out and getting evidence that shows that they're absolutely innocent and we've got charges dismissed. But I'll tell you, coincidentally, it looks so guilty. So I remember hearing that statement and thinking it was like nails on a chalkboard to me, because I'm telling you what, that is one of the most damaging thing is the mindset of people that there are no coincidences. When if you've never seen that movie Magnolia, you should see it. Was great. But the whole concept of these crazy coincidences that happen over your life, just based on the way energy moves, the way we move as human beings, the way we act, all these different things. The same reason why you can literally be in a small town in, Croatia, and then literally bump into your childhood friend that you haven't talked to in a long time. That's something that seems a coincidence that seems unlikely, but it happens all of the time. So there are coincidences in murders,
and those coincidences can influence the burden of proof.
They make or break because it answers the question: even though they are coincidences, is the doubt reasonable? That's what a coincidence can say. Because for me, looking at all of this, it is disturbing when you go back over it and you go, there isn't that much evidence. Take away the affair. Take it away.
And
take away the affair.
Improper handling. Yeah. There's some other.
If you take away the affair and the fact that he just did not come across well, the biggest piece of evidence for me that I would say leans towards his guilt for me was the fact that the bodies were found 2 miles from where he was fishing, which seemed suspect to begin with. And I bet you if I sat down with the fisherman who told me how the tides worked and all that other stuff, they may say that you could have dropped it. I don't know, because nobody ever unraveled that. But I would love to know the question of, if you had dropped the body somewhere else, could it still have washed up there? Because I did see one detective say that before they found the body on this cove area, that they had suggested, like somebody had said, a detective had said, I bet you will find the body at so-and-so cove, wherever they end up finding it. Because I guess over the time, because of the way the tides all came together, that was a dumping place. And they had found several other bodies over history that have washed up on shore in that area. So there could have been some more information that maybe even if it was, dropped somewhere else, that it could have moved over there. But I will say that is the most damning piece of evidence is going to be the locale, the where he went in, and then where the body was found. And to me, is that beyond all reasonable doubt? I think this would have been a hard one for a jury. I can only imagine the stress. It took them 40 hours to come back with a decision, and I can only imagine how that must have felt from them. And I think they would have had to lean on the fact of, and I hate to say this, what some jury members will do is they still sometimes go, listen, well, he's a crappy guy, he's a liar, and look what he was doing after she died. So even if we're not 100% sure on this, we don't really feel bad. You know what I mean? So it's like they walk away
go
going,
to her candlelight vigil. He sold her car right after she,
there was just a lot of other pieces together. But it did make me look at it so differently. So the jury comes back, they find him guilty, and then that same jury is the one decides between life and the death penalty. And in this situation, he was given the death penalty, which was questioned later on appeal. One of the questions that came up was the jury improperly screened? So when we talk about that jury selection, and we talk about when you're doing an actual verdict and then you go to the sentencing phase. So a lot of different pieces happen. So one of the questions is, how was he given? Yeah. So one of the questions that we've seen was why was he given the death penalty by the jury? And then later on, it was transferred to it being just life in prison. He questioned, why isn't he dead? And it's been 20 years. Yeah. But it's because part of the appeal that was taking place is that after you're found guilty, the jury then, it can be the same jury. Sometimes there's situations where there's an issue and it could be a different jury. But so the same jury was deciding on, is he going to live or does he get the death penalty? And they listen to all new testimony. Like they get to listen to victim statements, all kinds of stuff.
Did this go to the Supreme Court? Was this the Supreme
No, I think it was just, I think, did the Supreme Court come back?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the big questions that were asked was that there was an allegation that there was a jury member that were questioned about their beliefs with the death penalties. One of the questions we'll ask jury members is, what is your belief with the death penalty? Would you be able to give somebody the death penalty if they were found guilty? And that's a question that's asked. And because there are some people who will say, absolutely not. Under no circumstances am I going to do that. And those people have got to be screened because now they obviously have a bias, and those could potentially be people that are stricken off of the jury. So there was an allegation that there was, I think, a jury member that was improperly removed who had a bias against the death penalty, but then was never actually properly questioned. So we talked about before is that then you get to question to say, you may not agree with the death penalty. Like maybe a jury goes, I don't agree with it. But then the question has to be, well, would you be able to sentence someone to death if they were found guilty? And that's kind of the next questions that we ask in order to figure out, are they going to be biased? And those questions, I think, to a degree, were not asked. So based on that, that was part of an appeal, and that did come back as being successful to where his his death penalty was actually transferred to being a life in prison. So now he's sitting there.
I think it's interesting, too, to add that the jury foreman, an attorney, requested his own removal. He was getting pressure from fellow jurors who wanted to replace him as a foreman. Yeah. And he was receiving threats, which led to his removal and replacement by an alternate juror. And he was the foreman. So they were under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of pressure. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting too that they said, I guess everyone celebrated, and there was a juror who did an interview afterwards who said, this is nothing to be excited about. Like we sentenced somebody to death at that point in time, based on the fact that we believe that he murdered his wife and his child. So our hearts go out to both families. I know this is definitely one of those situations where you're looking at on both sides, and both sides took a loss. But Laci Peterson and her poor child, I mean, it's just so devastating to think about what could have happened to her, what that would have looked like for her. And there's new evidence now, though.
Yep. So the Innocence Project, who took on this case, who obviously believe that there is something to be questioned here, they motioned to the court just recently trying to get DNA evidence, a bunch of other evidence that they believe should have been tested or should be retested with the new technology. The judge did deny almost everything they had asked for. It was 14 different pieces of evidence, except for the duct tape. So there was a piece of duct tape that was found on Laci Peterson's, I think, in the front of her pants. Tell me how a duct tape stays on the water for months. I mean, duct tape. Somebody should be interviewing duct tape because I'd like to know.
Yeah,
I didn't know it could stay there.
Like, where was this made?
Yeah, I think
it's insane,
questionable for sure. So they're going to be testing this duct tape. So we may hear more about this as it kind of unravels. But Scott Peterson still maintains his innocence while he's sitting in a jail cell. 21 years later, he's been sitting there. And it was just interesting to watch him after all these years and to see his kind of demeanor about it. But that is all we have for today, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, just write us, let us know. We appreciate you guys immensely, and we will see you next week.
Legal Candy. Thank you.
Bye-bye.